Welcome to episode 124 of the GTO on 5G. It's the latest insight scoop on everything 5G. We cover 6 topics in about 20 minutes, and it's brought to you by More Insights and Strategy. I'm Will Townsend, and joining me again this week is fellow analyst Anshel Sag. Let's get started. But before we do, just an apology. We missed a week. I was in London. Anshel was traveling quite a bit. So we apologize to our viewers and listeners, but we've got an action-packed agenda today. I want to start with my first topic. And this past week, Rakuten and Juniper Networks announced an alliance to provide RIC for free. And it got me thinking, what does this mean for 5G operator monetization opportunities? And so for those of you that don't know what a RIC is, that is a RAN intelligent controller. And it's focused on providing optimization for RAN functionality in an open RAN environment. And so I did share some insights on Twitter. And what I find compelling is typically RIC is something that Juniper has monetized and charged for. And so with Rakuten, basically they're providing it for free. Now, I don't know the sort of the underlying arrangement between Juniper and Rakuten. I mean, Rakuten could be paying some sort of a licensing fee to include it. But from my perspective, this really elevates their SimWorld platform. And they're, from my perspective, Rakuten is addressing one of the key obstacles to Open RAN adoption, which is the integration of it all. And what I like about this announcement as well is that, not only is it a positive from, a CapEx, OpEx perspective, certainly it addresses some of the performance concerns that people have had with Open RAN that originally was really focused on sort of more of a cost optimization versus a performance optimization. But certainly, companies like Marvell and Qualcomm are providing silicon for accelerator cards there. But I just think, this is actually, it could be a very disruptive offering from my perspective to bundle this. And I actually got a preview when I met with Tarek, who's the CEO of Rakuten, when he was at Mobile World Congress Americas. But that was under embargo, obviously, for a few weeks. But I know you don't really focus on architecture and infrastructure like I do, Anshel, but would love to get your thoughts here.
Yeah, that was actually the reason why I wanted to make sure you explained what a RIC was.
Right.
I have a feeling a lot of people don't know, but you
Yeah.
beat me to it, so I didn't have to interject and ask you to. But in general, I think that is a very good point about the fact that Juniper would normally charge for something like this. And in my mind, it feels like there's some kind of new structure that they've created together where there's some revenue share or some profit sharing.
Sure.
And that, Rakuten can deliver the solution and Juniper gives it to them so that they can go forward and get this, capability out in the world.
Yeah.
Because ultimately, if Rakuten's offering it, and a competitor wants to offer it, maybe they just come to Juniper and they pay for it that way. So, you never know how these things go, but it sounds like it's definitely like a demand generating activity.
Yeah, I agree. And what's interesting, I follow Juniper quite extensively on the enterprise networking side as well. They've really been driving very good growth within their enterprise business. Traditionally, Juniper has been a very service provider oriented company. But with the acquisition of Mist and some other acquisitions, and really what they've done to put together a full automation suite with Paragon, they're really seeing a lot of growth in enterprise. And and what's interesting, there may also be a strategy here to continue to accelerate their growth in enterprise, because when you look at Open RAN, that's a major component in a lot of the private 5G deployment scenarios, whether it's as a service or it's on premise. And so this could actually drive additional revenue and profitability within enterprise for private 5G adoption. Now, obviously, they're not going to reap any revenue on the RIC in this scenario, but I think it's pretty innovative and it's interesting. I think Rakuten picked the right partner because I've actually spent time with the service provider team at Juniper, and their RIC platform is actually quite robust. So yeah, this is all interesting news. And again, from my perspective, really addresses one of the big hurdles with adoption, when it comes to the integration. And then what I also like about this too is just the ability to allow operators to more easily monetize new services. But with that said, let's move to your first topic. And you were in Sonoma with MediaTek at their recent summit, and you want to share some updates from that.
Yes, I'm traveling a lot, and
we both are.
That's part of the reason why I missed, or we were unable to find a time to record last week.
Yeah.
This week, I just got back last night from this, which is why we're recording on a Sunday instead of recording on a Friday or a Thursday. But basically, their executive summit is where they make a lot of their big announcements for chipsets coming in the next year. So they announced their new Dimensity 9200, which is a 5G SoC. Has all the latest cores from ARM. So it's got a Cortex X3, 710, 510. It's got the Immortalis 17 GPU with ray tracing, and it has their latest 5G modem, which is capable of millimeter wave. So this is actually their first flagship chip with millimeter wave built in.
Yeah.
Obviously, you have to still have all of the front end and the modules to make that happen. But this is a another opportunity for MediaTek to reach feature parity with some of their competitors, whether that be Samsung or Qualcomm. And then on top of that, they also announced the T800, which is a thin modem specifically for non-smartphone applications. So this is likely going to be announced as the next step in Intel's 5G PC aspirations. I currently have the HP Dragonfly G3, which has the T700 in it. So this is going to be a very interesting chipset to see how they use it in different applications outside the smartphone, because they use the smartphone SoCs for that, and they don't really sell the modem separately except for to Intel. But I believe we'll see this in more IoT applications and potentially other types of devices that need a 5G modem that's not as expensive as maybe some other solutions. So it'll be really interesting to see how that rolls out. And then I think the non-5G announcement, which was a big deal at the show, right at the summit, was that they announced that they are one of the major suppliers for the new PlayStation VR headset, supplying some SoCs custom for Sony's new VR headset coming next year. So that's not really a 5G announcement, but as far as 5G announcements go, those were the big ones. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, so I tuned into a little bit of the virtual session, sort of off and on. It was a marathon. It was like several hours, but I think at a high level, what I'm impressed with is MediaTek really sort of stepping up their offering, and they've traditionally been sort of in that value category. And having an additional competitor to the companies that you mentioned, I think is a good thing, because it's gonna set the bar higher. Sort of it raises the water level, for everyone. And and so I think from my perspective that's pretty compelling. I had one question though, because I didn't get the details on the T800. Did they share like what that sort of that bill of material for that piece of silicon costs relative to, say, a full 5G modem solution? I mean, is it 30% less, 40% less for these thinner device applications?
They didn't really say. I think we'll probably find out more once devices start to roll out and market with this chipset. There weren't that many details about it, and that's why I actually wrote an article, and that will be publishing early next week, kind of covering all the different things that were announced at the summit.
Cool.
As well as some other coverage that I've been trying to get out, because trying to balance time between travel and attending things and writing things is always a difficult challenge for us analysts. So
it really is. I mean, I know you've been on the road several weeks in a row. I think I've been on the road, like after next week it'll be 8 weeks in a row. I get 1 week break, and then I'm in Riga for 5G Techratory, and we're hoping to have someone from that event on a future standalone podcast in the next couple of weeks, because that'll be coming right after Thanksgiving. So stay tuned there. But let me go to my second topic this week, and I want to talk about Cradlepoint. And I've been spending quite a bit of time with Ericsson and Cradlepoint lately. Cradlepoint last week announced availability of their 5G optimized SD-WAN platform. And so, why is this a big deal? Well, it's a big deal when you think about organizations that are cellular first in their strategy, and a lot of them are, especially manufacturers, as they're looking to automate, their manufacturing, their OT environments, and that sort of thing. I actually collaborated with Cradlepoint, and right before the announcement, published a research brief, and you can find it on the More Insights and Strategy website. I've also shared it on my social media channels as well. But I've coined a term, so take this, Gartner, converged 5G WAN edge. Now, that might sound like a mouthful, but it's the whole notion of the convergence of 5G SD-WAN and zero trust security all coming together. And what's interesting is that with Cradlepoint's announcement, if you care to dig into it. I shared the announcement last week on my Twitter handle as well. What's interesting is that the ability to optimize SD-WAN in an LTE or a 5G world provides some interesting capabilities from a network slicing perspective. And certainly Soluna is leaning into that with its platform. They talk about micro slicing, within their private 5G platform. But really, from my perspective, when you think about SD-WAN, it's been a very crowded market. At one point, there were over 100 vendors that were vying for position. There's been some consolidation with some acquisitions, certainly HPE acquiring Silver Peak. But at the end of the day, when you kind of look at SD-WAN, it was really created for a traditional campus and branch environment, and certainly now hybrid work is the norm as we put the pandemic in the rearview mirror, and SD-WAN has to step up and adapt to that. So from that perspective, I find it super compelling. So if you'd like to learn more, again, you can go to the More Insights and Strategy website. You can download that research brief for free. And also, I participated in a LinkedIn Live event with Cradlepoint where we talked about this subject. That is available if you go look both at my Twitter and my LinkedIn profiles. I shared that link from last week as well. But I know that's a mouthful. Anything you want to add there, or any insights, Anshel?
No, not really. I don't think I have enough knowledge in that area to really contribute anything valuable.
Oh, cool. Well, let's move to your second topic then, and you want to talk about LinkNYC and Link5G towers, if I'm not mistaken, right?
Yeah, so LinkNYC is like a public service that the city of New York offers to give people better cellular coverage and access to the internet if they don't have cell coverage, using piggybacking on different types of networks. And there are plans to have 2,000 of these across the city, in addition to the private cellular networks infrastructure. And they're placing these specifically in public spaces where the city of New York owns the property, like the sidewalk. And apparently there's some unhappy residents in the Upper East Side,
Shocking.
which is a traditionally wealthier part of town.
Yeah.
And they're unhappy. They're trying to claim that the 5G tower impacts their health, and that's why it needs to be removed. But basically, this is it's kind of a public service, and I'll be honest with you, I don't think they're the prettiest looking things.
Right.
I think and LinkNYC could have done better to make these devices look better, because they basically look like giant Q-tips.
Okay.
I don't know how else to describe them,
Yeah.
but it's a big thick pole that looks like you would have a light at the end of it, but then you've got about 5 little notches for different types of antennas that are inside of a shroud. It's not very visually appealing. I think that's the main reason why these people want to get rid of them. But they're trying to use the health argument, that radiation might be a concern, and it's not. But yeah, this is just an interesting thing. It's gotten into the New York Post. I saw it on some other publications. I think it was RCR covered it as well. So it's a 5G tower, but people people want better coverage, but they don't really want to have the infrastructure or see it in their way.
Yeah, and I get it. The architecture, in the city of New York is amazing. It's interesting that this company didn't do its research because I spent time recently with AT&T and we were in New Orleans and we did a drive around and they were showing us some strand mounts that blend really well with sort of the old style lamp posts that you see all over the French Quarter, and then you know in places like Colorado, I've seen antenna configurations. They're green. They try to make them blend in with the trees and the surrounding environment and that sort of thing. So I think this company could have done a little more homework. But a quick question for you. So um, was there any sort of information sort of behind this initiative? So is this part of, kind of the rural, I mean, obviously, New York City is not in a rural part of the country, but
Right.
did they leverage any sort of federal funds to do this? Because it seems to me like it feels like sort of a digital divide thing, right?
Oh,
Providing.
it absolutely is. That's the whole purpose of Link NYC. Like,
Okay.
Link NYC exists specifically to bring Wi-Fi into underserved communities,
Got it. Okay.
and that's why like this is such a polarizing topic, because for some communities that don't have issues with internet access, they don't want these devices, but
Right.
in order to build a network, you need to deploy it everywhere, not in just the places you
Right.
think you want it the most. So,
Yeah.
um, apparently they have 20 of these 5G sites in place. They're calling them kiosks, but they're basically cell towers with like a little bit of a screen, a very small little screen. They use the first generation of these Link NYC devices look like video ad boards that you would
Okay.
see. But I think they maybe pulled back on that design and went a little bit more like with the tower to focus more on the coverage, right? Because
Right.
ultimately the cell coverage and the Wi-Fi coverage is what makes this useful. But I actually have previously talked to some journalists about this and looked over some of the the engineering capabilities of these devices and like what they look like.
Yeah.
And what's interesting is um, they do deliver multiple millimeter wave opportunities for carriers as well. So
Yeah.
the top two antennas are for millimeter wave operations,
Okay.
and then the next one's for sub 6 or CBRS/IoT, and so is the other one. And the bottom one's actually for Wi-Fi, for public Wi-Fi coverage. And then
Okay.
there's even more slots for other operator equipment. So there's like literally like I'm counting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 opportunities for operators to slot in some kind of
Yeah.
connectivity. And
Yeah. No,
that's why I
that
think
sounds.
it's valuable.
No, it sounds super compelling. Sort of a neutral host scenario there, and especially for millimeter wave, you're going to have that densification, given the propagation challenges. Which that is a great segue to my third and final topic. So I want to talk about Samsung Networks and a recent 5G millimeter wave proof of concept in Australia, and why it's important. So basically, Samsung has stated that they've hit a milestone here in Australia. So they've been able to prove a very high performance link over a 6.2 mile expanse. And
Mhm.
so, I don't, I think our viewers and listeners understand, why that's important. And there are other companies that are very focused on extending the propagation of millimeter wave, like Mavandi and that sort. But it's great to see Samsung, who obviously has risen to become one of the top cellular infrastructure providers relative to Ericsson and Nokia, really demonstrate this, because this is going to be really important to figure out the propagation challenge with millimeter wave. But what are your thoughts?
I think this has been an ongoing topic. I think a lot of different vendors have been trying to show off, what the maximum distance is that they can achieve with millimeter wave,
Mm-hmm.
because with fixed wireless, the further you can prove your technology can reach, um, the better you're able to convince somebody that they can, if they put up a mast high enough with millimeter wave, you can, serve a whole neighborhood with
Yeah.
one cell site, right? So I think it's good to see that companies are continuing to try to push the envelope on millimeter wave. It seems like millimeter wave has kind of taken a back seat to midband when it comes to a lot of fixed wireless as we're seeing today.
Right.
But I think there are some applications where it does make sense, and maybe that spectrum is easier to attain, and maybe it's a good thing that people aren't fully abandoning millimeter wave yet. But I think we're actually going to see a resurgence of millimeter wave probably in the next couple of years as mid-band capacity starts to fill up with users and applications. So we're going to need millimeter wave, whether it's long reaching or short reaching, to kind of alleviate the congestion that will inevitably happen with 5G and midband, which kind of tees me up for my next topic.
Well, why don't you get at it?
So this is something that I read in RCR from our friend Sean Kinney, and this was a 5G millimeter wave standalone test. This was done in China with CICT Mobile, Nokia Shanghai Bell, and ZTE using a Qualcomm Snapdragon X65 modem, which isn't the latest. The X70 is their latest. And they were able to achieve 7.1 gigabits per second downlink and 2.1 gigabits per second uplink with a latency of 3.6
Holy
milliseconds.
moly, that's crazy.
And I think, to your point, that latency is incredibly good. It's even better than I think what most people have seen so far. And I think this is a really critical thing to talk about because I actually think China is going to be the next big millimeter wave market after the US. Because I think China's density is going to lend to it extremely well. And I think all the Chinese operators know this and are eagerly awaiting the availability of the spectrum and the infrastructure. And obviously the densification is not going to be cheap or easy for them, but I think it's also going to pay off a lot more in urban areas for China. And I think that's part of the reason why we're seeing, MediaTek supporting millimeter wave in all of its chipsets, because so many of their customers are Chinese OEMs. And I just think we're seeing a lot of different pieces of this millimeter wave pie starting to come back together again. And so many devices already supporting millimeter wave, and having that capability only lends to its value being realized much more quickly than I say, say in 2019 when it was first launched.
Yeah. Now you made some great points here and earlier when we were talking about Samsung, and one is around capacity. And when you look at fixed wireless access and the growth with T-Mobile, they're going to hit a threshold where they cannot afford to impact their mobile users, and so millimeter wave is going to be a natural next step. I also agree with you that likely China is going to be the first to really deploy it in a big fashion, and I also agree with your point that basically, given the C-band auction and the dollars that were spent there, all of the efforts right now are going to, at least in the U.S., are going to be based on building out those mid-band assets, and so I think we'll start seeing millimeter wave in pockets. Certainly, we've talked about the venue, sporting venue, type application and use case. Verizon's been leading very heavily into that with its ultra wideband service. But yeah, I think you're right. It's like, I think over the next, 18 to 24 months, it's going to be midband. And then I think, as the operators get through that, then they'll turn to millimeter wave and they'll deploy that where it makes sense. But with that, it's been a great podcast. So before you head off to Hawaii, Anshel, why don't you take us home?
Absolutely. We hope our viewers and listeners found this week's topics interesting. If anyone out there would like to provide insights on a specific 5G topic for a future podcast, please reach out to us on social media. Will is at Willtown Tech, and I'm at Anshel Sag. We hope you have a great weekend. Please tune in again next week.